Welcome to the New America Foundation. We're very pleased to have you here for this event featuring Elizabeth Warren, entitled A Matter of Trust, Connecting Consumer Protections to Financial Reform. And my name is Kramer. I direct our asset building program here at the New America Foundation. And this is a program that looks at a number of innovative ways to promote social development and economic security, especially through policies that enable families to save and build up their asset base over time. And through this work, we've had a long-standing interest in a number of the problems in the financial services industry, especially the proliferation of abusive financial practices. These are things that end up kind of targeting low-income communities and end up stripping assets away from families that really need these resources the most. So these practices have made the asset building process more difficult for a number of families, but they also played a role in the economic crisis that we've all experienced. And as we build our economy back up, as we think about what to do with policies that take us forward, we clearly see that more people need access to an array of high quality and low cost financial products. And being able to manage resources effectively, being able to manage your finances effectively, it's essential for families that are looking to chart a path towards economic security. And really this is an issue that extends up and down the income scale. So an array of things we know have gone wrong with our financial services sector. We've got these high-cost, low-quality products and services. They've created new cost centers for banks and, importantly, the non-bank sector alike. These are the payday lenders, the check cashers that have become very debilitating for a number of families. So they've hurt us all. And the debate is engaged. What do we do? Where do we go from here? How do we put the pieces back together for a sustainable financial sector that provides value and protection for participants in the economy? And really, this is a debate that's taking us up to the very minute, to the very day. It's unfolding in real time, as I like to say. And to help make sense of this debate, we've invited Elizabeth Warren to the podium today to describe her perspective on what's at stake, what's going on, what some of the dynamics are that are in play. And we're looking forward to hearing from her. Then we're going to have her sit down with David Korn, who's the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones magazine. And he's an astute observer of the Washington policy process. He's been following this debate. He's also a good friend of mine, but I think for our purposes today, it's his insight that we're looking for. Actually, recently he was on a very instructive Bill Moyer's PBS discussion on financial reform, and he edited a piece of mine in Mother Jones last week on 5 keys to successful financial reform. So anyway, he's got, I think, some questions for Elizabeth and some comments as well. So after David interviews and talks with Elizabeth, I'll pop back up here to the podium, and we'll take some questions from the floor and have a discussion at that point. So for a number of reasons, we're really pleased to have Elizabeth Warren here. She's the Leo Gottlieb Professor of Law at Harvard University. She's conducted groundbreaking research there in bankruptcy issues. That's what she was known for before TARP, before financial reform. Harry Reid asked her to head up the Congressional Oversight Panel looking at the TARP program at the end of the year, I believe. She's accepted. I think we're all better off because we're getting some transparency and scrutiny of this $700 billion allocation of public resources that were designed to stabilize the economy and invigorate the national economy. So very important work with the TARP program as well. And I'd also like to mention she's written an excellent book with her daughter a couple of years ago called The Two-Income Trap. We had her at New America a couple of years ago talking about this book, and it really looked in very new light at some of the increasing risk that a lot of families face when they're relying on two incomes to kind of maintain their middle class and just their current lifestyle. And I think a lot of the things that they were talking about in this book really have come to pass in the current recession, and it was quite ahead of its time. It really sounded an important alarm. She saw how people were being inappropriately steered into inappropriate, loans that they had no business being in, unhealthy financial arrangements, and then she began to think about a policy response. One of the things she put on the table a couple of years ago was the concept of a Financial Product Safety Commission. And this was an article that appeared in Democracy Journal. It had the tagline, if it's good enough for microwaves, it's good enough for mortgages. And the point being, we're getting a lot of scrutiny with these consumer products, but here's some other products that are quite debilitating, quite harmful, and really we're turning a blind eye. So she's been really an important part of the debate since. Presidential campaigns have picked up on this concept. It was a component of the Obama administration's financial reform proposal that they rolled out in the spring. And if you haven't read some of her work, there's a recent Wall Street Journal article in your packets. You might have seen her on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. Really excellent discussion on the history of banking in the U.S. and how we've skidded off the tracks. Very, very informative. We've posted that on our blog, The Ladder. We also posted recently a skit that was conducted by the former Saturday Night Live alumni presidential imitators with Will Ferrell and Dana Carvey talking about the Consumer Financial Protection Agency. So I think it's fair to say at this point the debate's gone viral, and it's been viewed by, I think, 2 million people at this point, which I think is a great deal more than the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has a video on their website, Stop the CRA. They have a video as well. I'm not sure what their views have been, but they're fairly well organized. So up until now, it's not necessarily been a fair fight. We've had Elizabeth Warren on one side and the special interests of the financial sector on the other. So we've kind of watched this seemingly mild-mannered professor but more than hold up her own. And she's argued, along with others, that the next regulatory regime needs to be designed with the consumers and not just the banks in mind. And so to review some of the politics here briefly, the House has already passed a bill with the Consumer Financial Protection Agency in it, and deliberations have been underway in the Senate with a lot of attention going to see what Senator Dodd is going to do. He's been negotiating with his Republican counterparts, Corker and Shelby. Just this morning, the news flash is that Dodds prepared to release a bill on Monday without their support. And this is because Republicans have come out hard against both the standalone agency and maybe other provisions that give the agency some power. So we're going to kind of monitor this over the weekend. But when they make a final deal, the details are going to matter. You know, what is going to be in the final bill? And here's 3 questions that I think are very consequential, extremely consequential. One, are the non-bank providers included? These are the check cashers, the payday lenders. Are they included in the oversight of this new entity? How extensive are the rulemaking and the enforcement mechanisms going to be? You know, they're going to need to have some teeth and to be strong and substantial. And then what's the relationship with the other regulators and the state and local authorities as well? So we need we need a federal floor and not a ceiling. So the details are going to matter, and what Elizabeth Warren says is going to matter in this debate. So that's why we're here. So with that, let me turn it over to the Professor.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Reed. Thank you very much, and thank you, Reed, for having me today. Reed is the one who pointed out that New America, I'm particularly pleased to be here because New America was one of the very first of the public fora where we were able to talk about early research on the two-income trap and the hollowing out of middle-class America. So I feel like I owe a special debt of gratitude to the New America Foundation, and I'm pleased to be back here again. I just want to talk about for a minute, instead of starting a speech with everything that's wrong, I want to start by talking about what I would like to see so that there's no confusion about this. I'm someone who, through the years, has signed credit card agreements, mortgages, checking account agreements, car loans, student loans. I've kind of done most of the things I think that middle class people do. And what I'd like to see is a 2-page credit card agreement. I want one in big print that's in plain words so that I can tell up front if I carry a balance on my credit card, what is it really going to cost me? I don't want to have to wonder if because of the fine print and some $29 fee here or $49 fee there, my free credit card, in fact, is going to cost me an average of $300 a year. I just want to know that. I want to know whether or not it's going to have a chance that the interest rate is going to double or going to triple over some short period of time, even if I was still following all the terms of the agreement. I want a 2-page mortgage agreement. I want to be able, fairly simply, to be able to compare 4 mortgages in front of me and tell which one costs the most, which one carries what kind of risks. I want a 2-page check overdraft agreement. Plain words, I don't want to be stuck with crazy overdraft fees. I don't want bank tricks that increase the odds that I'm going to be in overdraft and end up costing me a lot of money. I want a car loan that doesn't have a hidden kickback in it, averaging between $1,000 and $3,800 that the dealer, when he sells a used car note to someone else, gets in order to put the customer in a dirtier, more expensive product. So I want to make this clear. I expect to pay for what I get, but I don't expect to be tricked or trapped into paying for something that I didn't bargain for. And because this is what I want a consumer financial protection agency. I want a cop on the beat to make sure that it's a level playing field. I'm not looking for more than that, but I'm looking for that much. I want to be sure that there is an effective way to make sure that this is a market that works. It's a competitive market. I'll pay for what I got, but I need to be able to understand it in advance. Now, I feel strongly about this for 2 reasons. The first one is because I believe in contracts. Contracts represent an agreement between 2 parties that lets each one walk away happier. One of us got money and the other one got sneakers or medical services or a new car or whatever it is we wanted. The premise behind contracts is that we both understood what the deal was. We both made our individual decisions. I'd rather have the sneakers than the money. I get what this deal is, and this will be a wealth-enhancing transaction for me. Both sides. I teach contract law, and I teach that contract law is designed to enhance total wealth because people engage in contracts that let each person walk away better off, each side. Contracts let the invisible hand work. That's how markets are supposed to produce the magic of increased wealth for all of us. Now, I've taught contract law for decades. I love the subject. I love my students. I love my course. The problem is that consumer financial products don't work like contracts anymore. They are governed by contract law, but they don't work on the basic premise of contracts. There is so much incomprehensible fine print that the whole idea behind a contract has collapsed. Contracts that used to be enforceable because both of us understood the terms of the contract, because both of us could negotiate those terms, have completely disappeared. So thanks to the fine print, we now have a world in which check overdraft, for example. Average overdraft in America, $17. That's how much someone overdrafts a checking account. Average overdraft fee, $34. So people are paying, think about that, they're paying double what they overdrafted on average, these are the averages, in order to borrow money for 1 day. Credit cards, double and triple interest rates for people who pay on time because the company has figured out some way to declare that they're not happy with them and they just want to be able to raise the interest rates. What makes this one particularly galling is that this practice has taken off over the past, 10 months, 6 to 10 months, at a time when those very same companies are borrowing at effectively 0 interest rate from the U.S. taxpayer. So let's just all be clear on that. We lend forcibly, because we have no choice as taxpayers individually, we're lending our money to them at zero, and then they lend it back through credit cards to hardworking families who can't afford to pay their credit card bills off in full every month at interest rates that have doubled and tripled in this period of time. Used car loans, I mentioned it earlier, hidden kickbacks. And the point of all this is it's all there in the fine print. It's that what these companies are doing is not unlawful. What they're doing is taking advantage of the current state of the law, which is effectively a state of lawlessness in many ways, in order to distort the basic contract premise. So I guess I would say it this way, that the invisible hand is withering and dying. In 1980, Bank of America credit card was 700 words long. It's a little over a page. Today, Bank of America's credit card their credit card agreement is about 30 pages long. What's happened in that period of time is that the words have multiplied and the comprehensibility has shrunk. And that's become the central business model. So my view is we've got to shrink the legalese. We've got to make contracts readable again. That's the basic premise behind this agency. And I should say, I hope you saw it. Last week, the AARP released a new nationwide study that they had done. And the study, the first question in it was about credit cards. And they asked about whether or not people would like, in effect, the two-page credit card agreement, a credit card agreement with the terms everyone could understand. I've never seen poll results like this. 96% of Americans agree with the notion that credit cards should be short, two-page agreements that can be read comprehensively and understood. Only 4% of Americans disagree with that. And here's the part I love best. Of the 96% who agreed, 91% agreed strongly that this is what should happen. So think about that. I mean, this is something that Americans want. They want to be able to understand their credit products. They want to know what it costs before they get in it. They want to believe they're not going to be bitten by things hidden in the fine print. The second reason I strongly support a consumer financial protection agency is because I believe in streamlined, accountable government. Consumer protection today is scattered among 7 different federal regulatory agencies. They all have a different piece of the pie. Now, the consequence of that is that we have a system that's bloated, it's bureaucratic, and it's ineffective. It's like the trifecta of bureaucracy. The consequence is that it's much easier for big banks to capture consumer functions of an agency if the agency really doesn't care about protecting consumers, if that's not its central mission. Some of these agencies, like the OCC, get their money directly from the big banks. And think about what that means. Their budget, a substantial portion of their budget, comes from the large banks that they regulate, and the banks are the ones who choose whether to be banks or thrifts, for example, at the federal level, or to go to the state level for their charter, or sometimes to decide to be non-bank lenders with no federal or state supervision. Since the banks are the ones who can decide that, that means in effect today they pick their regulators. And that's like saying to your regulator, I not only pick you, it means I could pick not you, and if I decide to go somewhere else, I'm taking the hunk of the budget that I was otherwise contributing to your operations. And for a small financial institution, not so much power. For a large financial institution, that is substantial power in the rulemaking authority. And that's the structure where we are today. That's why we do not have meaningful regulation in this area. There is no single agency with a primary mission to provide meaningful rules over the consumer credit market. It's not there. It just does not exist. And as a result, there are no meaningful rules to make products clear. There is no cop on the beat to make sure that this market works. Think about it this way. We have an FDA, we have an EPA, we have a Consumer Product Safety Commission. Why do we have those? We have those for the protection of everybody who gets a prescription drug. We have them for the protection of everybody who drinks tap water. We have them for the protection
of anyone who puts a little baby in an infant car seat. But we also have them for the protection of those markets. Because no one has to think when you take a white pill that's been prescribed by your doctor, is this really the antibiotic that my doctor prescribed, or is this baking soda, which would have boosted long-term or short-term profits for the pharmaceutical company that put them out? The point is that in all these other areas, we have meaningful regulation so that markets can work. The difference is that with financial products, which are products in very much the same sense of the word, families are left without recourse and we have a market that's broken. So that takes me to the last point I want to make, and that is, if this is so obvious, if 96% of Americans think, yeah, that sounds sensible to me, I'd like these simpler products that I can read and understand, why isn't it law? Why don't we just have this agency? It would be less total government bureaucracy, but government bureaucracy that is now effective. Why hasn't it happened? To which I can only say, welcome to the wonderful world of Washington bank lobbies. The banking industry has now a complexity machine that it has begun to perfect. Now think about how this complexity machine started. It started back in the 1980s as credit cards started getting more complex over time. Because the central insight was that if you just really have 3 or 4 basic terms, everyone can read them, it's a really competitive market, and that means profit margins are very, very small. But if you can put things back in the fine print, and it doesn't cost you customers, but it builds revenue over time, those $29 fees, catching people once they have balances and upping their interest rates from 9% to 29%, that becomes a model that basically revolves around complexity. Let me give you a very complex product, and you won't figure out which product is the cheapest. You won't be able to make the comparisons, which product is cheapest, and you won't be able to decide in advance how much it costs you. So complexity started in credit cards. It morphed throughout the financial services industry. The mortgage lenders, I think, very much took a page out of the book of the credit card issuers and said, wow, you know, we don't have to have those dopey old plain vanilla mortgages. We can really get snazzy here, and thus were born liar's loan, teaser rate mortgages, you know, lots of things that were born. Actually, I think much of this borrowed from credit cards, and so on throughout financial services. So that's sort of step one. Step two in the complexity machine is what happened, not just at the consumer level, but what happened at the worldwide level. Take a look in higher finance, at derivatives, right? At credit default swaps. Has anyone been reading the books that come out of this? As our financial titans explain, I wasn't really quite sure what those things were. I didn't quite know what it was that we were trading. Oh my goodness, you mean we were aggregating risk rather than dispersing risk? We knew it had something to do with risk here. But the complexity machine provided the opportunity to make extraordinary profits in the information asymmetries. The notion that I'll get out there and sell you a very complex product and then bet against whether or not that product's ever going to pay off in the way it's supposed to. And it was all there somewhere in the fine print if you understood it. So now the complexity machine is moving into part 3. And that's the political aspect of the complexity machine. A consumer financial protection agency. It really isn't a very fancy idea. It's a pretty straightforward notion of how we can get simple financial products for most Americans. Put them in their hands, let them make good financial decisions, empower Americans' families. And what's happened? Oh, say the folks in Washington. Oh, say the lobbyists, it's a lot more complex than that. You just don't understand. We need a special rule here and an extra piece there. And it takes us months, actually we're now past a year, to think about this, to think it through, to talk about all of the details. The complexity machine is hard at work. And I'm just going to be blunt about the complexity machine here. The point of the complexity machine here is to create a smokescreen to permit people in Congress to be able to vote with the banks and against families and have some cover. So complexity has become the issue, and I just want to be clear about this. This is not a hard issue that we face in financial regulation right now. This is families versus banks. It's that straightforward. And I want to be clear. This is not liberals versus conservatives. This is not Republicans versus Democrats. It is not a partisan issue. 96% of Americans want contracts they can read, credit card contracts they can read. That's Republicans and Democrats. There are not statistical differences in how they poll. It doesn't matter who they voted for president, for president last time around. These are issues that cut across the political spectrum because American families do see it as that straightforward. Banks are fighting to kill the contracts and kill the consumer markets so that they can continue to drive up short-term profits. Complexity works for them. It works against those who end up paying, American families. So here's where we are at the end of the day. Families are looking for real reform. They know who caused this problem. Ask them. They get it. This is a problem that was brought to us by the financial services sector, if we want to use their bigger name. I think we can use banks for a shorthand here. They see it as the banks are the culprits and government needs to rein them in. If government is incapable of doing that, then government is broken. Government no longer works on behalf of the people, it works on behalf of the powerful. Families are reeling from the economic effects of this crisis and from the fact that they had to pony up to bail out these banks. Now it's beginning to sink in that the very same banks that they ponied up to bail out have turned around and are using their money to lobby Congress to make sure that there are no significant changes in the rules. The fury is mounting. Families are demanding change. They want a banking system that's reined in and a government that works on their behalf. There are a lot of important lessons that we need to learn coming out of the Great Recession. But one of them is the need for meaningful rules of the market. And the second is that the government needs to be completely and squarely on the side of the people. Truly meaningful rules will start one family at a time. Thank you.
Say something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I have no questions.
Okay. That's fair.
No. I want to thank Reed, and I want to thank you for guiding a lot of Americans through this thicket, through the complexity machine, and for making me wish that I had gone to law school. Mm-hmm. Although I think most law professors probably aren't as clear as you often are. So I have a few questions after hearing you and after listening to what you've been saying for weeks and months now, focused mainly on the Consumer Financial Protection Agency. And one of the key questions, these things boil down often to not the big picture. Do we need this? Do we not need this? How to proceed? But to sort of the details and the fireworks, so to speak. Now, okay, if we have this agency, where do we do it? Where do we put it? What powers does it have? And you've been quite good in your interviews in talking about some baseline requirements, because I think, as you said recently, my first choice is a strong consumer agency. My second choice is no agency at all. This is the part I like. And plenty of blood and teeth left on the floor. You left out internal organs, but I get the point. But they're talking now, your idea originally was a standalone agency, like the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the FTC, the FDA. These are not part of bigger bureaucracies. But now the debate seems to be, well, it will be somewhere. It won't be on its own. But it can be an independent agency or entity within another agency. And the debate is it within the Fed, the FDIC, the OCC, or maybe they'll put it, inside the group that's in charge of patents or something.
I was thinking Department of Agriculture.
Yes. Uh-huh. Well, commodity credits.
There you go.
But it seems to me, I'm not an expert in financial stuff, but watching bureaucracies for the last few decades here in Washington, they all have their own culture. And there's always a competition for resources, personnel, priority. And I can imagine another administration down the road where the head of a particular Department of Treasury or maybe someone who's been appointed to the Fed or the OCC might not be so enamored with having an independent agency working against what he or she may be trying to do in the big picture. And so the whole notion of just putting this, this cop on the beat inside a bigger force that may not even be a police force strikes me as somewhat problematic. Your thoughts?
Well, you're right. I mean, it's a worrisome approach. But I want to underline, as I have from the beginning, it's all about functional independence. And functional independence is about whether or not there's an independent budget, whether or not there's independent rule-writing authority, whether or not there's independent enforcement, and whether or not the head of the agency is appointed directly by the president and not by someone within the agency. In other words, could an agency be a landlord? That's possible. But it's really going to be, are the functional elements of independence there? If they are, it will be a good agency that can get the job done. If they're not, I really want to emphasize this about the consumer agency itself, then there's no point in doing this. We already have 7 bureaucracies. We don't need an 8th ineffective bureaucracy so that we can just simply pat ourselves on the back and say, well, now we've done consumer. The whole point behind the Consumer Financial Protection Agency is not to create a bunch of new tools. They're actually largely there already at the Fed.
The Fed could do a lot of this
That's
already.
right. The Fed could do a lot of it.
If
The OCC could have done a lot of it if they wanted to. The point is the structure and accountability. So it's really about getting structure and accountability that gets the job done.
Now, the way things work in Washington. Say something is passed, and we know that Dodd will be putting out his own proposal. We don't know what's going to be in it on Monday. But in Washington, there are compromises, things get passed, and they're often hailed as the solution. Case in point, McCain-Feingold. Right. Fix the system, right? We don't have to deal with it now for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Well, it really didn't. But nevertheless, if something is passed with this title, wherever it's put, they're going to proclaim it as the solution. Are you ready to be the arbiter and say, no, kill this thing, don't vote for this, even though it was my idea originally, it's not good enough? You will get a pretty big role, I think, for a lot of people as the influencer here.
I'm not the influencer. There are a lot of people who pay attention to this and a lot of people who are deeply invested. Americans for Financial Reform is a group of, I think it's more than 200 organizations now that have taken a very active role in trying to monitor and trying to advance good regulatory reform. And it includes a lot of really serious players, the AARP, the AFL, SEIU, Consumers Union. I'm sure I'm leaving out lots and lots of good folks. And lots of small organizations, which is part of what I think makes it wonderful. Arizonans for Financial Reform. I'm for this. So there are going to be a lot of people who will have a view about it. But if you're asking me the question, if it has no clothes, am I willing to say naked? You bet. I mean, sure. I'm just not interested.
Can we talk on Monday?
Well, I'm just not interested in one more bureaucracy that doesn't get the job done.
Do you think if it's put in the Fed, even with the requirements that you just laid out, that's workable? I mean, Barney Frank, who produced what you consider a pretty good version of this, has called putting it in the Fed a joke.
Mine is, I'm going to sound like a lawyer here. I've got to see the details.
The fine print?
Yeah, I got to see the fine print. You bet. I got to see the fine print here because that's really what's going on. It depends on what the fine print says.
Do you think, well, let me ask you, have you been talking to Dodd and his staff as he's gone through this the last 6 months? They don't call you?
Nope.
Not at all?
No.
Do they have your number?
I've talked to talked to someone in Dodds' office probably twice in the last 6 months. I think that's right.
Well, maybe they're reading you. Let's put it that way. Are you surprised? I mean, with what's happening in the lobbying end of things? I mean, this is you've been working in Washington now for 2 years or so, year and a half. I mean, is this what you expected to see happen? I mean,
I saw the movies, right? I was a sophisticated bon vivant.
Yeah.
I knew that there were lobbyists out there. I'd seen Thank You for Smoking.
Yeah.
And it takes my breath away. I just am amazed. I had lunch with someone yesterday who's the head of a trade association who said to me that the Wall Street banks have hired, I believe his number was 54 lobbying firms to kill the consumer agency, and a 55th firm to do nothing but coordinate the 54. This is exactly how I described it, and that they meet every week to talk about how to kill this bill. And think what the hourly charge is for this meeting, since each of the 55 firms sends multiple people. Just the meeting itself on how to think about how to kill this little agency staggers the imagination.
Well, this gets to one of the fundamental dilemmas in our political policy system, that for a lot of consumers, if it's an extra $20, $30, $40 here and there, it does add up, but you don't always see it at once, if you see it at all. But yet for these folks, we're talking literally billions. So
That's
who
right.
has the incentive
right.
here?
That's right. They've got the incentive. And the point is they've got the money.
Right.
Literally.
And it's our money, though.
That's right. That's the irony here. The money collectively that's coming out of the pockets of American families would support a pretty hefty lobbying effort on its own. But ordinary families are not coordinated. I mean, every time we think about this. Credit card companies. 50 million American families cannot pay off their credit cards. 50 million are rolling it from month to month. Collectively, those 50 million spent about $120 billion last year just on fees, penalties, penalty interest rates. That's a lot of money. So when we talk about the revenues from financial services, consumer financial services, we always have to remember this is ultimately a zero-sum game. This is money that came out of the pockets of ordinary folks. And let's be frank, it did not come out of the pockets of the very poorest Americans, and it certainly didn't come out of the pockets of the very richest Americans. It came out of the pockets of hardworking families, people who are stretching the hardest to make it from month to month. They have paid effectively a huge tax to these large financial firms, and that money is now what's supporting the lobbying to make sure that doesn't change.
This just gives me an idea. You know how the Purge system works, which Nader started many years ago, in which they go to utility companies in states and so on, and they basically make them pay a very small percentage point to support advocacy on behalf of the ratepayers. So it's kind of a tax, but you end up getting a lobby or an advocate for you. If you took, a 1% charge on the $120 billion,
I'd be rolling in money.
Yes, I'd nominate you for that job.
There we go.
But I mean, that would be,
it's an interesting point.
That'd be a way to sort of empower the people and create an advocacy, and but of course, I think if all those companies that are incorporated in Delaware, it would be kind of hard to maybe make this happen.
Right.
But let me ask you back to some of the politics here. The White House, embraced your proposal and last spring put it as part of their financial reform package, and the administration has talked about it, from time to time. Do you think the president has been doing all that he can to rally support here so that the public has a clear idea of what's happening in Congress now?
Look, let's be fair. I'm a single-issue voter. So my view is if the president is spending any time doing anything other than the Consumer Financial Protection Agency, he's not spending enough time. But I will say this about the president. he has been absolutely unwavering in his support for a strong, independent consumer financial protection agency. I have never heard a statement reported from the president that suggested the slightest hesitation in his, or the slightest, I guess I should say the slightest tempering of his support. So I take him,
And
I take him at face value.
And unlike Dodds' office, you have been in touch with the administration about what's happening.
I have talked with the administration about what's happening.
Okay. Let me ask you, as in your role as the head of COP, the Congressional Oversight Panel overlooking TARP, do you think at the end of the day the bailouts were a good deal for the American taxpayer?
I think it's a hard question. And I think, let me give the sense of yes. I think they probably, some strong action on the part of the government is what pulled us back from the financial abyss. So in that sense, the answer is yes. We acted strongly. We said we are not going to let this economy plunge over the edge and let all of our financial institutions collapse under the guise of simply that's the way markets go. Having said that, I think the structure of how we executed on TARP, shoveling tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars into a handful of Wall Street institutions and then saying for the rest of the economy, well, this is complicated. We'll see what we can do for you sometime. I think it was absolutely the wrong structure. I think that the structure of creating a too big to fail so that even after the TARP money is repaid, and I think most of it will be repaid either directly or through a tax ultimately on the financial institutions, that too big to fail stink lingers in the air, and it profoundly distorts our economy. Until we get serious regulatory reform, we have changed our economy in seismic ways, and we've got to pull it. We've got to pull it back. Pull it back is the wrong metaphor. We have got to move it forward to the next version. So it's a very mixed answer, a very yes and no at the same time.
One last question.
Yes,
I can
please.
See. Do you have any interest in running for senator from Massachusetts?
You know, are you asking me if after a year and a half here I am more attracted to coming to Washington?
That's
than
one
I
way of
was
putting
earlier?
it.
That's one way of putting it. Yes, that or I could stab
Ms.
myself
Smith?
in the eye.
Ms. Smith,
Is that a no?
It's my view about Washington.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, we are going to keep this conversation going with some questions from the floor, as promised. And I just did want to note that you really have given us a new metaphor. This complexity machine really is in practice how they've been operating and working. And I've actually called this the disclosure regime. You know, there's a safe haven if it's all spelled out, whether it's in 10 pages, 30 pages, where no one reads it in the fine print. And you know, what I think has been put on the table is actually a new regime, which is one based on principle, transparency, simplicity, accountability, and it actually is a regulatory structure if that becomes the basis, which is a whole new kind of ball game, and one that would really would take us in a whole new place. So whatever we get, if it has these principles in it, at some point, it could be a basis for more action down the line. Okay, Andrea Levere.
Hi, I'm Andrea Levere, the president of CFPD, Corporation for Enterprise Development, long-term partners in asset building. I really want to ask you what it feels like to have Jon Stewart have a crush on you.
We're going to give you a mic.
Okay. But what you raise is the fact that there needs to be a social movement that parallels the political work that's happening here. And we have been building the social movement at the state and local level for years around asset building, both protections and development. How would you see helping to organize that movement to be an effective counterbalance to the political and lobbying activities that are going on that captures that AARP number you described?
Yeah. So I'm only going to give a very short one to this because there are only two kinds of answers, very short and ones that go on for days. I think that this is like it is for the green movement. I think we have to understand when we talk about the whole financial area, partly it's about how we act individually. It's about how we learn to budget. It's about where we spend our money, whether or not we deal with credit cards on a very personal level. And I've written about this before, and I'm I'm moving back into writing about this again because I think it's such a key element. I also think it's an element of understanding, as we do in the Green Movement. It's what I do personally, but it's also what I demand of those I do business with. I will make choices to do business with those banks that follow certain principles and not with those banks that don't. It is also about what we demand of those we elect to represent us. And I think we at least have the potential to link these together into a coherent narrative. This is something I'm very interested in doing.
Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate McKee from the World Bank, and the world is watching. I was in Kenya 3 weeks ago advising the Kenya government on what they should do on financial consumer protection. So they look here, they're motivated, they know they have to do something, but one of the conclusions they've drawn is that disclosure doesn't work or isn't enough. And I'm wondering if you could comment on a starter package for developing countries that are trying to put in place the most important things to be there. And let's assume for a moment that they will enforce, although their capacity is limited as regulators.
So I'll give you the very short version of it, and that is, think of the basic principle of contracts. They only work if both sides get it, if both sides can read it, if both sides can price it. And what that means effectively is that a credit card that can be read in 4 minutes or less by a person in our country with a high school diploma at a 90% comprehension level. If that becomes the test for deals between companies and individuals on financial products, you've got a pretty good basis for empowering consumers to make good financial decisions and a good basis for binding them once they make those decisions. A kind of honesty in the market from the beginning that means you don't have to go the route of, well, we're going to outlaw double cycle billing and then we're going to outlaw, 15 particular penalty rates and we're going... The old notion, the 20th century notion, of how to regulate was a whole series of thou shalt nots coupled with complex disclosures that didn't really communicate anything. We really have to go beyond that. I think that Reed is exactly right when he says this agency has the potential to be the first 21st century agency, one that incorporates what we're learning about behavioral economics, but more importantly, one that incorporates the principles of an accountable government, a transparent government, a government that's there on the side of its people. And you can see how it works. Yeah. A real faith that we can make this government work, and because it belongs to us.
Great. Yeah, front row here.
Along with you, my other new favorite financial talking head is Carmen Reinhart, the University of Maryland professor. And among other things, she warns is that if we don't clean up the broader aspects of the financial mess, that we will essentially fall back into another crisis that brought about the need for the TARP. Can you connect the reforms you're talking about to preventing the next big one and ending up back where we were?
Absolutely. I think of this as the Jamie Dimon scenario. Some of you...
I'm sure he appreciates that.
I'm sure he does. Some of you may recall, let's do this story. 1794 to 1930s, to the Great Depression. Basically, the American economy lived through boom and bust cycles. That's just exactly how we did it. And some people got really rich on the upswing, and frankly, a lot of little farmers and shopkeepers got wiped out on the downswings. That was the way the American economy worked. And sometimes great fortunes got wiped out. I need to be fair here. We hit the 1930s and we said, in effect, collectively as a country, we can do better than this. And so we passed 3 pretty simple rules. FDIC insurance made it safe to put money in banks. Glass-Steagall said the banks that take that money cannot do crazy things. And some SEC rules that got some basic honesty and fairness into how stocks are traded. And that was it. That bought us 50 years of economic prosperity and security simultaneously. We went 50 years without a financial meltdown. We had some recessions and so on, but no financial meltdown. And what was the response? We began to deregulate. And we deregulated in multiple ways. We deregulated affirmatively by actually changing the laws. That brought us the S&L crisis, the savings and loan crisis. We deregulated by not regulating the new innovations. That's what we did in the whole derivatives market, that sort of thing. We deregulated by seeing problems. Enron, the books are dirty, and not really demanding that they be cleaned up. So that now we're at a place where we are on the threshold. We have seen the Great Recession. We will write a set of economic rules going forward. We are at the fork in the road, as Yogi Berra said, and we must take it. So that's where we go. We either write a new set of rules that puts some honesty and accountability back into the system, and we get another 50 years of prosperity and economic security. Or we don't. We effectively don't change the rules. We leave the rules intact as they are now. We may make some cosmetic changes, but we leave them intact as they are. And Jamie Dimon has already explained to us, with his great financial insight, he testified before Congress. I think it was very important. He said, yeah, we're going to have booms and busts about every 5 to 7 years.
So there's a difference between a boom and a bust.
No,
Financial meltdown.
well, let's talk about that with Mr. Dimon. He seems to have done rather well in this last financial meltdown. And that's the problem we've got. There are those who think the rules that got us to this crisis are exactly the rules we should hang on to going forward. Now, I'll make one small point, and then I know we want to get other people. I want to link, every time we talk about what do we need to do about systemic risk, we talk about things like we need more regulation of the too big to fails, we need a systemic risk regulator, we need resolution authority. And actually, I'm a huge believer, particularly in resolution authority. I've spent a lot of time and tried to work with people on this. But if we care about systemic risk, we care about the Consumer Financial Protection Agency. Let us never forget this crisis began one household at a time. It began with one lousy, deregulated mortgage that was sold to one household, destabilizing that household, but then, more critically, making wild promises of the kinds of returns that these financial instruments were going to produce, which were then packaged into mortgage-backed securities. Other forms of them were packaged into other kinds of asset-backed securities. They were then traded up the line, smashed and dashed and sliced and resliced, until ultimately those risks were aggregated and brought down the entire economy. What we do with consumer financial products on the front end will either keep the risk dialed up on systemic meltdown, or will begin to dial that risk back down. So the two ends of the spectrum are the consumer products on the front end as they're fed into the system, resolution authority or bankruptcy on the back end as we talk about the biggest institutions. Those two are directly linked to each other. The other parts we can work out in between, but that's what financial reform is about.
Part of that story that I want you to kind of keep telling is that this was an unregulated sector, and there's these other parts of the financial services sector which are also unregulated, that are subprime, but these payday loans and other kinds of financial products that are very debilitating to households. And when you say banks, and a lot of people think, oh, well, the banks, and well, at least they're regulated, safety and soundness, that's what we care about. But this other sector is equally kind of relevant and needs to be included as well, right? Is that a point?
So let me do both hands. Yeah, we talk about non-bank lenders, and my husband, every time I talk about this, my husband said, what is a non-bank lender?
Right.
And all it means is a lender who doesn't take deposits. So if you decide to set up a payday lending outfit or a title loan outfit, if you know about how we do these on cars, or a mortgage company, if you get your money from Wall Street instead of getting your money from FDIC-insured accounts, then you're not a bank. And that means you escape much of the regulatory apparatus. The problem we have is that certain issuers are regulated, banks, savings and loans, and certain are not regulated. But across the board, the financial products themselves are not regulated, and they're not regulated level, in a level, no escape way. The central insight to the Consumer Financial Protection Agency is to regulate by product, so that it isn't relevant who issues the mortgage. It isn't relevant who runs the payday loan outfit. Frankly, the bank holding companies figured out how to run all the pieces of the game through different subsidiaries. The point is to say all products will be treated alike.
It doesn't matter where the food comes from.
That's right.
The store. It doesn't matter who made it, how they were incorporated, but what matters is what comes off the shelf.
That's right. And when it comes off the shelf, it needs to have these certain qualities, like that people can read it.
A couple more questions that we'll have time for. David, what is the political endgame here? Dodd decides he's spent all this time with his Republican friends, decides to go it alone. What do they do?
Well, that seems to be the way that the Democrats play this game. They spend a lot of time negotiating with people and making concessions, and then they don't bring them aboard, and then the Republicans accuse them of being overly partisan. And so Dodd, first he had one partner, Shelby, who was the ranking member of the committee, right? And then that wasn't working out too well, so they went their separate ways, and he brought in Bob Corker, who I don't know what standing he has. He's certainly not a household name.
He has a vote.
He has a vote, and and apparently that wasn't working. It seems, reading the tea leaves, you may know more than I do, that one of the issues that split them was how much enforcement authority to give to the Consumer Financial Product Agency, and there was also an issue on these non-bank banks, particularly payday lenders, who have become, as we found out, a very generous campaign financial supporter of Senator Corker. So he didn't seem to be too keen on bringing them into this new regulatory scheme. So Dodd, who doesn't have a lot of standing these days, given his own countrywide problems and others, is coming out with a bill of his own on Monday. And some people thought that, when he announced he was going to retire, that maybe he could just sort of swing for the fences, do what he thought was right. I mean, his announcement this morning said, "I still want to come out with a consensus package." Well, if health care reform is any lesson here, consensus packages actually may not be possible. That may be unfortunate, but for there to be a consensus package, you need two sides coming up with a contract in good faith, so they both can walk away happy. But if one side is really out there wanting to block it, or doing the work of the banking industry, the big finance, then it's really hard. So I think now it's going to be a decision for Dodd, but also a decision for the Democratic leadership. How much of an issue to make this? This is why I asked you about the president. I think this is, from a political point of view, ready-made for the Democrats. I mean, they're going into the next election against tremendous headwinds. We may have 10% or so inflation for a year. Unemployment for a year. Sorry, your money's still safe. For a year, and we haven't had an election like that in decades. And people are just ready to vote against any incumbent. So what can they do here? I think the president, Harry Reid and others should come out and say, we want what she wants. This bill now, strong bill, independent, powerful. We're not willing to compromise. We want to keep it clear. If you guys want to vote with the banks, fine. We're happy to have that debate in November. You can vote for us, you can vote for the Republicans who are sinking this bill because of the complexity machines and because of the money from the banks. But the public only, they can't read the fine print. They can't follow the fine print of Washington political and policy debates. And that's not, that's not an insult. People are overwhelmed. They can't read through 2,700 pages of a health care bill. Most people voting for it or against it can't read through that. And so they're not going to do the same on this bill. The president and the Democrats need to make this clear cut. They have to, that people do not see the hockey puck; they see the stick. They have to see the Democrats swinging a stick that they can understand.
So I think it's the beginning of blood and guts.
Teeth on the floor, blood, whatever you have it.
Let's take a couple questions. We can get some comments. We'll do 1, 2, 3 in the back, right here, and over there. We'll stack them up. Yeah.
Hi, Stephanie Dew with Nightly Business Report. Senator Corker did say that a key issue was divorcing the enforcement from the rule writing. Will a consumer protection agency that doesn't have both those tools be effective?
Is a watchdog without teeth effective? Especially once everyone knows. I just think the whole point of a watchdog is that when it snarls, you see the teeth.
Right behind you, Mark.
I'm the son of a stockbroker who actually voted for George McGovern in 1972. I'd like to sort of follow up. I mean, I agree with David. Could you, we did a lot of work on healthcare. We have I think that we're about to pass a healthcare bill finally after all this education. How long is it going on? 80 years, 50 years? I don't know how long. Do you think that, and I think you did a great job conveying the information. Do you think that we can have a public campaign that can convey the message and deal with the complexity machine and misdirection and all that?
All right, let's stack up a few behind you, and then we'll do one more.
Hi, Professor Warren. I'm actually a former student of yours, Oliver Goodenough from Vermont Law School. So good to
Give
see
him
you.
my best.
Surely will. My question is that if, God forbid, the CFPA is not approved by Congress, what would the next step be to go in for round two? Yeah. What could the average American do? What could supporters in Congress do to bring true reform?
Okay, thank you. And Mark, bring up right here to this woman next to the camera, and then we'll let you guys weigh in and close us out.
My name is Dr. Caroline Poplin. I've been an admirer of yours since you first appeared in the newspapers. My question is, will this work if there's no personal accountability for the people who run these institutions? Stockholders, bondholders, consumers, everybody has trouble. And these guys walk away with millions. They never need to work again. And until they have some quote-unquote skin in the game, can we develop a system that works?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, David's been clever in taking notes, and I haven't.
So
I was going to say, we'll see how much of this I can remember.
Well, the first one was sort of a political question. Can you mount a campaign? He talked about 50 years on healthcare, on this issue to get the public behind action in Congress.
Yeah, I think we can, because I think this is fundamentally a simple idea. Americans believe in paying for what they get, but they don't believe in being cheated. They don't believe in being tricked. They don't believe in being trapped. And I think they get it. People in this zip code may have some problems with, well, I don't understand why anybody has a problem with their credit cards. But people across the country, here's my sense of it. I play a parlor game. My husband and I actually both play this game. You sit down at a table with any 8 people, no matter what their backgrounds are, no matter where they are. And in under 2 minutes, you can get, with the right prompts, just asking a few questions, people to start telling one-up stories about lousy credit card deals, how they've been cheated, or if not they themselves, their adult children, their neighbors, someone who works with them. Everybody in America, I believe, now has a lousy credit card story. That's a good place to start building from. So I think the goal on the side of those who want to see change is just to keep the story simple. It's about 2-page credit card agreements. It's about 2-page mortgages. I'd like to put in a plug right now. The American Enterprise Institute has a 2-page mortgage on its website. It also has a 2-page check overdraft agreement on its website. There is a 2-page credit card agreement that's not American Enterprise Institute, and I'm just blocking on who's got it. They're out there. We can do them. We can change this market. So that's my first one. I actually want to go to the third question, though, because I think there's something relevant to this. Can we change everything with this agency? Maybe. How does the world start to change if it becomes not all right to use the complexity machine to keep people out of understanding the financial products that they buy? Does that, let's just start thinking about the waves out from that. Does that mean that the cell phone folks may be on the run after a while? Others, and health insurance next up. And then let's move it to the way corporations are run. Does a taste for accountability and transparency
begin to spread over time, because that's how we get real change.
Yeah.
I think that's what happens.
Yeah, wonderful. And just to clarify, you are registered in Massachusetts, though? I mean, that's
Yes,
your home state?
In Massachusetts.
Okay.
I'm registered in Massachusetts.
Okay, just wanted to, maybe that's
Notwithstanding
good
my Okie roots.
And you've voted in the past? And,
I voted.
Okay,
I
all right,
voted.
great. Thank you very much.
But no nude pictures.
Elizabeth and David and all of you, very nice.
Thank you.